Chapter 25 of Sky Song by Abi Elphinstone. Esker. Esker woke to the Ice Queen's anthem and the sound of a bird call. She pushed back the feather quilt, stretched inside the cage she had slept in, and opened her eyes. Balapan was still crouched on the ledge outside it, but Esker knew the call she had heard hadn't belonged to the eagle. A short, sharp yap came again from the entrance tunnel. It was a cry of a snowy owl. Esker had heard a similar call from her hideaway behind the giant's beard, but something about this one was slightly different. And then Pipit burst into the cavern, and Esker remembered his words from the night before. The snowy owl call was a signal used by the Feather Tribe, a warning that danger was nearby. "The moonflit!" Pipit cried, as the Feather Tribe sat up in their cages. "She's crying, and her tail's tucked up and shaking." Jay scrambled up the ledges until he came to an empty bird cage not far from Esker's. "She's gone!" he gasped. "Rook's gone!" The Feather Tribe leapt out of their cages and reached for their bows and arrows. She's gone to the Ice Queen, hasn't she?" Esker stammered. Jay's face darkened. "Perhaps. Something inside Rook changed a few weeks ago. She came in from a hunt and her thoughts were darker, her words were sharper." He shook his head. "But I don't believe Rook's to blame. I think it's the Ice Queen. Somehow she got to Rook." Jay glanced towards the tunnels on into the mountains. "You must leave now. Your skis won't be much use on the ice flats, but we can lend you a sled and some dogs from the outchambers. Ride fast across the driftlands until you find the Grey Man. There's no time to spare if the Ice Queen knows where you are." Flint gathered up his sack of snow goose feathers. "What if Rook tells the Ice Queen where the entrance to the lost chambers is?" "I've ways of charming the door and changing its location," Jay explained. And then, after a pause, "You're not the only one who kept believing in magic when the rest of the tribe turned their backs." Grabbing Pebble from the food store, where he was helping himself to a third breakfast, Flint, Esker and Blue tore through the candlelit passageways after Jay. They ran past chambers filled with furs, bows and arrows, until eventually they came to a small cave that contained 10 yapping dogs. Balapan flew up to the highest ledge she could find and peered down. The dogs were bigger than Flint's had been, wolfish grey coats and strong, muscled legs, and they crowded round Jay, their tails wagging, as he harnessed them to a fur-lined sled. There was space enough for Esker and Flint to stand on the runners, and Esker nudged Blue towards the seat in the front. "For you," Esker whispered, "a little throne." Blue clambered on. "Happy." Pebble swaggered up to the dogs, desperate to be part of the pack, but Flint lifted the fox pup into his arms, dropped him onto Blue's lap, then wedged his sack of feathers at her feet. "Working dogs don't eat 3 breakfasts before a run, Pebble." He climbed onto the back of the sled, but Esker hesitated for a moment and looked at Jay. "You will come, won't you?" Her voice was a little more than a scratch. "When I blow the frost horn?" Jay nodded. "I'll come. The whole tribe will. I give you my word." Pulling her hood up, Esker mounted the sled beside Flint. Words she was beginning to realise were like glue. They held promises and friendships together. And though her own words were coming apart, she hoped that Jay's were enough to rouse his tribe when her call came. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. Jay smiled. He put his hand on a slab of rock on the chamber wall. "Once I open the door here, you'll be out on the driftlands." The dogs shifted their weight as if they could sense the journey ahead. "Ride fast across the ice and follow the river until it reaches the groaning splinters. You'll find the Grey Man there, and though our ancestors talk of a wise old man, it's my bet he'll be in pieces of light of what's been going on. The Ice Queen's reign won't have been kind to folk like him." He pushed against the slab of rock and crunched forwards to reveal a door out of the mountain. Almost immediately there was a sharp cry and a flap of feathers as Balapan glided into the world beyond. The cold slipped into Esker's lungs, and she squinted into the silver mist that hung over the driftlands. "Spring hasn't reached the north yet," Jay said. "You'll find the ice makes your travels swift." He clasped Esker's and Flint's hands, and then he ruffled Blue's hair. "Until we meet again, good luck." And before Esker, Flint or Blue could reply, the dogs lurched forward, hauling the sled out onto the ice, and it was several seconds before Flint gathered them under his control. He steered through the mist. "How are we going to find the river in this? I can barely see the Nevercliffs behind us, let alone Balapan in front." Esker peered through the wisps of white. They hung like floating ribbons over the ice, masking the morning sun. And though the Ice Queen's anthem had now trailed away, every time Esker heard a new sound, the wind moaning, a muskox grunt, she spun round. The mist was a cloak, and the Ice Queen and her sleigh might appear from under it at any moment. Flint nudged Esker. "Well, how are we going to find it?" "I'm thinking, Flint," Esker replied. "I need quiet for that." Flint tapped his mittens on the sled, and Esker tried to ignore him. And as they raced away from the nether cliffs, Esker thought carefully. Animals needed water to survive, so any wolves or musk oxen that prowled the driftlands would head to the river if they could break a hole in the ice. "Follow any animal tracks you find," she said. "They'll lead us to the river." But as Esker's eyes flicked downwards, it was not footprints that she saw. All around them now, only just visible through the mist, were caribou antlers, shed from animals themselves the year before. They lay on the ice like stiff white claws. "That's odd," Flint murmured. "Normally the hares, lemmings and voles gnaw away at the antlers after they've fallen from the caribou." Esker shifted her weight. "Why would those creatures suddenly stay away?" "Look, on the tip of every antler," Flint swallowed. "I think the smaller animals did come. They just never left." And as Esker peered more closely, she noticed the tiny animal skulls hanging from the antler tips. Blue tucked her legs up to her chin, Pebble burrowed his head into her furs, and in front of them the dog's ears cocked this way and that. It was like a graveyard of antlers around them, and Flint did his best to weave a way through, but when his sled crunched over one, the wind died away completely, and the silence that followed pulsed. "The Ice Queen's dark magic has been here," Flint whispered. "This whole place feels cursed." "A taste of what's to come for the kingdom if we don't stop her," Esker shivered. "Ride faster." Flint urged the dogs on, and in the distance they heard a wolf howl. Esker tensed. The sound was low and lingering, like wind moaning through a chimney, and as it rang out, the skulls on the antler tips rattled. Then it died away, and a few moments later the sled was free of the antlers, and Esker glimpsed Balapan's silhouette through the mist. She pointed down to the snow. "Wolf tracks, leading east." They followed them until they came to the river, a silent snake winding its way north. A few minutes later. "This grey man, what do you think he's like?" Esker asked. Flint flapped his reins, and the dogs sped on. "Old, if the Feather Tribe have been singing songs about him for generations, and unhappy, because the Ice Queen doesn't look kindly on Erkenwald's magic." Esker nodded. "We can cheer him up, especially when he learns that you're an inventor and you might know a way of reaching the stars so that I can blow the frost horn." Flint glanced at Esker. "You know inventions don't always work." "Yes." "So you understand this one could be a disaster?" "Yes." "So why aren't you more worried?" "I'm terrified," Esker said quietly. "But sometimes all you can do when you're scared is hope." The mist thickened without them noticing it first. It was only when the dogs grew twitchy, shying at the bends in the river and flinching at frozen trees, that Esker felt her heart quicken. Then the wind picked up, heaving and groaning and stirring the mist so that it rose around them like a slow creeping wave. The dogs stopped before Flint drew them in, and though they were large, strong beasts, they whined like newborn pups. And when Balapan appeared through the hazy screen and swept low beside Esker, she knew something wasn't right. Blue turned wide eyes to her brother. "I'm scared, Flint." Before Flint could reply, the wind blew harder, whipping the snow and ice up into its swell until a churn of flakes tore around them and the world seemed to dissolve into white. The dogs backed up towards the sled, and Balapan's wings juddered as the wind gathered pace and strength. Esker shielded her eyes with her arm as the snow beat against her. "This storm is brewed with the Ice Queen's magic. Keep going." Flint whipped the dogs on, but as the wind shunted the snow and ice against the group, the dogs yanked at their harnesses before snapping free and bounding away into the endless white. The sled ground to a halt again, and the blizzard raged with newfound fury, sending needle-sharp ice against the children's faces. Flint rushed towards Blue and lifted her, Pebble and his sack of feathers, from the sled. The group could barely open their eyes in the face of the storm, but Esker managed to, just a crack, and that was enough to see a square shape. A snow-covered food store, perhaps, a few metres in front of them. "There!" she cried. "Shelter!" Balapan spiralled into the sky and yapped, but her cries were drowned by the smashing of the gale, and Esker, Flint and Blue staggered towards the hut. They yanked the door open, and it clattered back against the wall when they stumbled over the threshold and hauled the door shut.